It is a delight to be here with you and to be with these brilliant folk. I want to urge you to read their bios. I don't want to take up too much time introducing them because their CVs are as long as the day. But let's just put it this way. They are towering intellectuals, towering voices in our current moment, and you all need to read their latest work, right? Let me say this as well. I appreciate Tulane's preface to our conversation, but I also want to give a shout out to those 7 students who are undergoing a terribly difficult time at this school. And no matter where you stand on the debate, what we want these institutions to remain the precious spaces that they are, where our kids, our students, our children learn how to be citizens.
Yeah.
Learn how to advocate for the things they believe in. And we want these institutions to not to be as punitive as they have been. Is that right? Is that right? All right. So, if you don't mind me not introducing you, is that okay?
Perfectly fine.
I'm going to presume a level of familiarity with my friends because both of them are cherished friends. I want to open with a question. And Professor Black, I want you to begin, if you don't mind. And of course, if you haven't had a chance to read Isaac's song, go out and purchase it right now. Not right now, after the conversation. What does it mean to write the kinds of books that you write? To linger and tarry with the characters that you linger and tarry with in a moment such as ours?
You know, when I wake up every morning, I never thought that I would actually live in a nation where I would know firsthand Jim Crow laws. Right? I never thought I'd actually live it. But I think we're here, right? And so when I write now, the thing I think about is I always think about Harriet Tubman running, right? And I think about Harriet Tubman running because I think that's the metaphor for freedom, right, for liberty. And so when I write, at least what I'm praying I'm doing, is offering somebody a stop on the Underground Railroad, right? That I'm offering somebody a means whereby they can at least imagine being free and hopefully fight towards that. I think of myself as an abolitionist, a kind of literary abolitionist, if you will, because I'm very, very clear that America has much promise. But I'm also very clear that until we tell the truth, that promise is unrealized. So I try to write in such a way, and I try to write the kinds of things that I think will help people be free.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Professor Perry, Black and Blues, if you haven't read that extraordinary text, after this, go get it. How would you answer that question?
Yeah, first of all, I'm so delighted to be in conversation with the two of you extraordinary intellects, artists, and educators. So I often talk about my work increasingly as haunting the past, and I'm going into the past and I'm tending to those in the past who have often been unrecorded and disregarded, and tending to them, but also looking to them for sources of insight, so similar to what Professor Black said. And there is a way in this moment where, we are all, legitimized by a variety of institutions, right? Our publishing companies, our academic institutions, and we're in a moment where we're not only are we facing political crises, but we're facing institutional crises, and we're facing, civic crises. And I'm not sure whatever the center is, and that's a real question. Doesn't feel like it's going to hold. So there's collapse impending, and many of these institutions upon which we have depended in our very personal ways may be falling apart in ways that we didn't anticipate. And so the work is both, for me, learning from earlier moments and voices about ways to be free, to pursue freedom, to be in right relation with each other, even when the larger social order is completely repressive. But it's also, I think, it is an encouragement that through the text to forge the kinds of relationships that actually can persist even if all of these things we depend upon fall apart. Right, so this idea of what are the publics that we're engaging with? We have these publics that are created by institutions, but what if those aren't in place anymore? There's a kind of connection that we have to be willing to not just hold on to, but to cultivate, to curate. And so that's part of, I think of a book as a relation. It's not the same kind of relation as we have with our students, but it is a relation with the reader that actually is about exciting the imagination. It's about encouraging ethical commitments. It's about paying attention, as you so often say, as a form of care, right? So, that's the hope.
So that both of you are public-facing in interesting sorts of ways, and in very different environments. In certain ways. One is at Harvard, the other is at Clark.
Clark, Atlanta.
Clark, Atlanta. Two very important intellectual spaces and educational spaces. What does it mean to be public-facing as you sit with the particular task that's in front of you, as you're writing the text? So then, Professor Black, let me just ask it more specifically. I mean, Isaac's song is such a challenging text. There is a lot of trauma and pain. It's not a Bildungsroman, but it feels like it's a coming of age by way of dealing with one's experiences, painful experiences with one's father in this instance. What does it mean to turn inward in the face of Trumpism, in the face of the assault on the the African American Museum and the Smithsonian, the latest stuff? Y'all have heard about this, right? You haven't?
Oh, yeah,
Trump
you need to know.
Trump issued an executive order placing J.D. Vance in charge of addressing the racist narrative of the African American Museum. And we should say, they mentioned explicitly Lonnie Bunch, but the Native American Museum is probably in the crosshairs as well. So, so in the midst of that assault, you turn inward on the page.
Yes.
Talk a bit about that, and let me give you some context, because there's always this, when we are experiencing the fever dream spiking, we don't really go to the interior, right? We tend to want to address, the assault, but to encounter this novel requires us to go here. I mean, we're in therapy in some way. So talk a little bit about.
It's funny when you made that announcement. I kind of chuckled because every generation of black people in this country has experienced this, right? So I'm trying to stop acting as if Trump is a new creation.
Come on.
Right? That's I'm gonna start there.
Come on.
Okay.
You see, he's set up like this. He's about to start going.
I'm trying to hold myself because I know we have to have decorum in these kind. I teach in a black space where we're able to just go ahead and tell it to you.
We want you to tell it to us.
Please.
That's right. No, I'm so glad to be here. Also, with these esteemed colleagues of mine, just brilliant people. But I will tell you this: I did this interiority for a reason, and I think that's the way black people discovered that you survive.
Yes.
Because the external is always attacking, right? So if you are stronger internally, the external doesn't have to move. It never has to shift. In other words, I really figured out that we really don't need white supremacy to move at all. If black self-love gets strong enough, right? And it made me think of December 31st, 1862. When black people gathered wondering if Lincoln was going to sign that Emancipation Proclamation,
Yes.
right? And of course, we call it Watch Night now, right? And it was so interior because they didn't invite Lincoln, right? And so black folks got together and had their own private prayer meeting, their own private prayer party, and what they were doing was, in many instances, conjuring, right? In other words, God moved Lincoln's hand, right, in order that this long-awaited and long-prayed for freedom would happen. But it was not a meeting with Lincoln. It was a meeting with something bigger than Lincoln, right? And black people have always believed in that. And so when I started writing this book, what I was very much concerned about, and am very much concerned about, is how do black people not only get our healing, how do we walk through trauma, whether white supremacy ever changes or not, right? Whether it moves or not. Because hoping that it will move has not been a really fruitful hope.
Not a good investment, huh?
So, and it seems to me that it's a useless hope because there is just something stronger. There's something greater. And in this book, my prayer is that between this father and son, if and when this healing can happen, what happens externally, they both can fight that together.
They both can fight that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's interesting that you use the word conjure, because Black in Blues is a conjuring text. I mean, you describe it as such.
Yes.
I remember when I was reading it in one of its earliest iterations, I think I either texted you or called you and said, I feel Zora Neale Hurston all over this book. What are you doing to me, right? Talk about what it means to conjure in this moment with Black and Blue drops in this moment.
Yeah.
In this moment where we're worried about what's coming at us, when we're worried about, to be frank, white folk losing their damn minds.
Right.
Right? Right? Nod your heads. Right?
And some black people.
Oh, hello. What does it mean to conjure now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is a sort of to riff on what you've just said, because, I think there's watch night, and then there is the choice in response to the moment of black people to free themselves, right? And to go behind Union lines, understanding that Lincoln has his deep limitations, and yet using that moment as a self-emancipation, and then and then they are on the field and learning to read on the field, and writing, once they learn to read, writing letters to Lincoln saying these are the things that we want as part of our emancipation, right? And so that it is that, I do think the language in many ways, conjuring or hoodoo, these are practices of resourcefulness. And so given the limitations of the context, to actually use the knowledge that is available in order to get somewhere closer to freedom. And so I think of it in this moment. I did a talk at the Enoch Pratt Public Library in Baltimore, right as they were announcing, there's no more federal Black History Month. And my response was, well, they didn't give us Black History Month, so they can't take it away, right? Negro History Week was celebrated for generations before there's some federal recognition. And so and this is also the importance of Black institutions, and it is also the importance of a kind of internal commitment, which I think is so much what you're talking to, that has to be sustained. And that doesn't mean that you don't make demands on the society, but you got to get the balance of advocacy and self-activity right. And I think
balance between
advocacy and self-activity has to be right in order to be prepared for the moments when things may open up or shift, but also to not be destroyed by the moments when fascism distends, right? Which is where we are, literally speaking, right? So conjuring there's something mystical about it, but there's also, part of the reason I talk about hoodoo is it's very practical. Whatever, it is medicinal, it is spiritual,
yes.
It's all of the elements. Whatever is at hand, to use it, to heal, to tend, to nurture community, to find, it's all in the music, it's all in blues, in the blues, right?
Yes.
That's the thing that we have to do.
Let me stay here for a second with you, Professor Perry, because there's a sense in which Black in Blues is a really interesting intervention in this moment. It's a story about the history of a people through this color, and it's it's not only a conjuring text, it's also a praise song in some ways. And in a moment where it feels, however familiar, however the moment may even be an echo of previous moments, it still feels wholly unprecedented because we're experiencing it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
We weren't here before.
That's right.
So we're here now
We are not.
experiencing this. So it
Right.
feels unprecedented in our lives.
Right.
And so there's this praise song that you drop in the midst of this trauma. Talk a little bit about the choice. And then I want to get to this thing because we're talking about, public intellectuals, public facing in troubled times, right? The tool that both of you use, right, is language. It's the word, right? Not just as, you're not speaking, right? You're trying to find descriptions, formulations, accounts that could help us see ourselves differently, more expansively. But so talk first about writing Black and Blues
Yeah.
under these conditions, and then I would want both of you to talk about the role of language, of being a writer
Yeah.
in such a moment as this. I keep asking the same question from a different angle. Have you noticed?
Hoping that we can
Right? Because I'm trying
get to there.
to go deeper.
Yeah, so I mean, I will say the moment, when I started writing, I certainly didn't anticipate this particular moment. And I do think there is, so there's this repetition of the ideology of white supremacy, of empire, of exploitation, of greed, all of these things that are coming together. But part of what is distinct is that the technology for pursuing it is so much more exacting and devastating. And I mean that both in terms of the surveillance state, I mean that in terms of the kind of weaponry that has been developed, I mean that in the kind, there is something unprecedented in terms of the tools at folks' disposal. And so that, I think is, I'm sorry, I'm getting distracted. So I think that there is something about this particular moment that is distinctive, that is harrowing. And tell me the question again. I lost my train of thought.
This writing Black and Blues, this praise song under these conditions. Yeah.
I think what the tradition tells us is that part of what it means to remain deeply human in the face of AI, and technology, all this stuff, is that we have a practice of creating beauty at the site of wound, and that creation of beauty at the site of wound is not a romantic gesture, it's actually the full insistence upon what it means to be human.
Can you say that? Can she say that again?
All right?
Because I think it's really a critical point.
Right, because what it means,
The practice of beauty.
The practice of beauty at the site of wound.
That's right.
Right? And that is, and this is because in fact, it's a kind of spiritual and moral grandeur that comes out of our tradition. This is why the whole world dances to our song, right? Because we do it over and over and over again. And so it's important to tell that story because we want to offer it to the babies. But we also have to remind ourselves, and I want to be very clear, there is a common practice these days of reducing our story to the violence and wound. And that it is a travesty to do so. And it also leaves us disarmed in dangerous ways. So the praise song is also a truth-telling mission. Right? That I think we need, sometimes we need a mirror. Right? And we have, and this thing that, this part about looking internally is part of that because we also can't be reduced to the outside-in gaze.
That's right. Absolutely.
So Danny, talk about language. Now, I should say, Danny and I were in graduate school together. When we didn't have any money, he used to cook the chicken, I used to cook the fish. There's even stories of my feet next to his head next to my feet.
That's right.
Under a fan.
That's right.
And the like. So
That's right.
I understand your intimate relationship to words and language, particularly given your own personal journey. So talk about language as a tool for you?
Well, you know, I really have to say that I don't come to language through the book first, right? I come to language through declaration, right? I come to the language through the sermon, right? I come to language through gospel music, right? So for me, the song, the sermon, those were the places where I saw the magic, if you will, of literature.
Yes.
I didn't get to a book till much later, right? I grew up where the book that people had in the house was the Bible, and maybe, you know, the encyclopedias, right? And
This is Blackwell, Arkansas.
that's right. That's absolutely right. But what that did for me was to introduce me, if you will, to the beauty of the turns of phrases, the beauty of the magic of cadence, the beauty of the way in which black people did the trickster move on English as a language itself, right? To create a kind of cadence, to force this language to say what we wanted it to say, right? I come to literature from that vantage place, right? Which is why even in Isaac's song, and all my books are named after songs and music, right? Because I'm the church musician, you know, which of course you know, right? But I think that there are things the song says that the pulpit has never said.
Say more.
Right? But that's because black people owned the choir. Black people owned the music, right? The theology came from somebody else. Right. So when we got in this place called the church, right, very often the church and the choir in terms of word and literature were actually at odds. I mean the choir and the pulpit. Because there are things that the pulpit would say that the choir would not back. Yeah. Right?
Make that concrete.
The preacher might say, there ain't but one way to get to the kingdom. And if you're going to get to the kingdom, you got to go through one way. That one way is Jesus, right? And then the choir would get up and sing, there are 12 gates to the city.
Come on. Come on.
You see? Right. You see what I'm saying? So, but that's because black folk were like, no. No, excuse me. And so, I mean, there are so many examples of that. Even ways in which the pulpit might condemn queer people. The choir never would.
Couldn't exist.
There never would.
Right.
That's right. There's no black gospel song that says, if you gay, you going to hell. No song is going to say that. No, but the pulpit might. But what I'm really saying is what I discovered later is that the literature of the pulpit was not our literary tradition. That was really the incarceration of us in somebody else's theology.
But the homiletic, you would say, is our.
Absolutely.
Because what you just did.
Absolutely, is black folks. Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So if we can just get a new book. Right. Listen.
That's why we write, right?
Listen.
New books.
Okay.
You gonna go there?
Say it again?
You going there?
Oh, I'm halfway done.
Okay.
No, I really am.
Because this is an interesting part of the novel, right? There's a sense in which Isaac's own journey has to do with coming to terms with his own desire, how he's perceived,
absolutely,
his own reluctance
that's right,
to deal with what he's hidden, his relationship to what he's displaced onto the man.
That's right. That's it. What he's displaced onto absolutely.
To the man who he has attributed all of these things
right
to. That has supposed to have his behavior has been disfiguring.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
But there's something else going on here, right?
Yes,
Something.
but his mother was singing his song since he was a child, right? And he didn't even know it was his song, right? If you recall.
Yes.
Right? And this music has permeated his life, right? And by the time Isaac gets to the end of
we don't want to tell you the whole thing. You got to go out and buy it. Go ahead.
By the time he gets to this end of this journey, Isaac does this miraculous, very spiritual thing, only because he went to a black college that taught him these traditions, right?
Which college was that?
Oh, well, that was Lincoln University, right?
Okay.
But I do think this is important because if we're not careful, we will think that the African-American literature literary tradition is merely an extension of the American literary tradition. Instead of understanding that the African American literary tradition is really an extension of the blues tradition.
Come on.
Right? Because the blues is the music, but the blues is also the word. Right? It makes me understand how there were black people who couldn't read, but they could preach.
Sure.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
That absolutely makes sense to me. But what also makes sense to me is there are people who can read but can't preach.
See, some of y'all, we're going to have to translate that later. But this is really an important point, because as you read your novels, as I read your novels across the body of your corpus, as I read the body of your corpus, this insight shapes the very ways in which you inhabit the English language.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not so much concerned with trying to see if my writing matches some other persons in the tradition, right? Because that's not really black tradition. Black tradition is what's the new magic you bring to it.
Yes.
Right? That's why we do this thing called improvisation. That's the center of the
But you would admit, though, I'm sorry, this is an inside, but you would admit that Ernest Gaines and James Baldwin was all over your prose.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, I think you have to study the tradition to do the craft well.
Right.
Absolutely. But I think I would do James Baldwin a disservice if I, or Ernest Gaines or whomever, if I could only write like them.
Yeah.
I don't think they'd be proud of that.
Exactly.
They've already done that.
Just so you know, when Danny and I would be driving in his Ford Escort and he was listening to a gospel song, he would do this thing. He would literally pull over.
It's not a thing, it's the Holy Ghost. We know what the Holy Ghost is.
And we would get out of the car in mid-traffic and just start shouting. And as you can see, dispositionally, we're not quite the same. But that's just an aside.
I prayed him through graduate school.
Imani Perry, my writing partner, my example, everything, I have found universes in your language, in your sentences. I've said to you repeatedly that to encounter a Perry sentence is like encountering an Emerson sentence. Each is a universe unto itself. Talk a little bit about the way in which you approach language.
Yeah. So the late, great Gil Scott-Heron said, for people who love language, there is no better place to come from than the southeast corner of the United States, which is an echo, right? And so that, this 20, and the way Morrison said is that, she said, oh, musicians they have sound.
Yes.
The dancers have moved. I just have 26 letters, and I have to do something with them. And so there is this for me, and I'm not a preacher. I'm a cradle Catholic. To try to answer the tradition, to try to stand in the tradition, to attend to rhythm, the sound inside one's head, to try to conjure up imagery, to try and pay it so that there's argument, there's idea, but there's rhythm, there's pacing, so that it is not just something that one experiences intellectually, but also emotionally and spiritually, that is the effort, and that each sentence is, or each paragraph is supposed to be a universe unto itself, that it is supposed to take you someplace, because again, at the sentence level, there's a relationship, right, with the reader. There's a trying to access something, and a lot of what I think of as trying to access is in a certain sense, there's all this talk about what's missing from the archives, what wasn't recorded about Black people, right? And then there's what we know, right, that our inheritance that is not necessarily recorded archivally, but is recorded in relationship, right, in love and tradition. And so the effort is to bring that, to insist that become part of the permanent record, right? The thing, and so that on the page, there's the circle of ancestors present on the page in order to actually lay claim on the page to this inheritance as an intervention into the body of literature. And I think that's what that's the best of what our literary tradition does. I absolutely agree. We are at best, drawing upon, if not solely aesthetically, but morally, ethically, spiritually, on this tradition that is much broader than the history of publication in the West, right? So I'm trying, so that's what I'm trying to get at. And just to go to this point about publics, that also means speaking on multiple registers, right? So we're talking to everybody, but there's some folks who could read between every line, right? And they hear the echoes.
Absolutely.
Right? So there's publics, plural, who we're engaging.
You know, there's this interesting exchange between Ralph Ellison and Irving Howe, when Irving Howe tries to tether Ellison to Richard Wright. And Ellison wants to say that he has different ancestors, that Wright is not, and Ellison's lying, but that's not the point. But he's saying that Wright is not his immediate ancestor. He gets to choose his ancestors. And at that point, he wants to talk about Hemingway and Malraux and others. And I've always been troubled by that, because on one level, he's right, that we get to choose our resources. But do we choose our inheritances of what we inherit? Do we choose our inheritance?
I don't know that we choose our inheritances, and I don't know that we have the intelligence to do it even if we could. Because there are some things we have that we didn't even know we needed, and we didn't even know we'd need on this journey. It's like choosing your blood, right? You don't get to choose your blood, but it does work in you, right? And there are things in our blood that you have no knowledge of whatsoever, and there are things that have informed us, right, which we wouldn't have picked at all, but it saved you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So in some ways, I'm glad I couldn't pick, because now I know there are people I would not have chosen, but now I'm smart enough to know that if I had not chosen them, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think inheritance is bigger than any of us, and I think inheritance is smarter, right, than us. And I also think something else. I think there are ancestors who are doing a work, especially even in those of us who are doing this work, this public intellectual work, and this writing, who are informing us in ways that I'm not sure we'll know about until we step into eternity.
Ooh.
Right? Like, there are some times when I'm writing, and I'll write something, and I'll say, oh, wow, I like that sentence. You know, right. So, like, where'd that come from?
Yeah.
And I believe an ancestor is sending that to me. That's what I believe, right? And I'm not sure who that ancestor is. And I don't even need to know. Just keep on sending it. You know, I don't have to know. But what I do have to do that I think is important is to acknowledge that it ain't just me.
Right.
See, I think the point is humility.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No. And that Richard Wright Ellison point is so well taken, because if you think about Wright, Richard Wright, who has with Native Son, has this aspiration to create a character in Bigger who is so destroyed by the logic of white supremacy and the forces of power, right? That he is an irredeemable character. But why that fails, why we feel for Bigger, right? Why we feel something in the not, and he wants it to be not sentimental, but it's emotional, is because he has a sense of what a beautiful sentence is that comes out of the tradition. So and it emerges more in his later work when he starts writing those haikus about nature, right? And he can't escape the beauty of the Mississippi landscape. He can't escape the kind of attention to the beauty around, even when he's trying intellectually to construct. And I think Ellison's similar. He's a musician. He goes to Tuskegee on a music scholarship. He's escaping school, going to Knoxville to play.
Right.
That tradition is in him, even while he's seeking these influence and using them. They're resources. But and that tradition, and they're different, because I am very insistent, these are different places that they're from, right? The Black Belt is a different landscape than Oklahoma. They have their experiences of race, the experiences of blackness are different. There are different levels of repression in the different places they come from. but the tradition courses through them and shapes what they think of as beauty and truth in ways that I think constitute that inheritance that is more than, right, the choice about who to read and who to be in conversation with.
I want to add something if I can.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with that. One of the things I think that happened with Ellison, I have my issues with Ralph Ellison, right?
Really?
Yes, sir. And one of the things I think happened, I think it has happened, I don't think it has to, but it has happened with many black public intellectuals. And that is, very often, becoming a black public intellectual is by necessity in so many ways abandoning black institutional spaces, right? And for me, the minute you do that, you get unplugged in terms of the creative center, right? For me, right? Because the institutional spaces that have informed black existence, when we talk about the blues, right? When we talk about conjuring, when we talk about the trickster tradition, these are not academic spaces.
Right.
These are not academic tropes, right? These are black folk common everyday tropes, all right? It's like trying to figure out how dressing can be stuffing.
Yeah.
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 But see, anybody black is gonna know.
Right. It's dressing.
And see, we keep trying to,
Hold up, is anybody black or anybody Southern?
but sir, I'm going to say black.
Because I think some Southern folk, I don't know, Danny.
I'm going to say.
I think the difference might be seasoning.
It's
might not be
cross
the
I'm going to
truth.
space.
suggest to you, and,
We're in
and-
New
and
Orleans.
some white folks know too,
Okay.
especially if they're in the South.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yes, yes.
Right?
But a lot of Northern black folk know too because their dressing tradition came South.
Okay.
Right? And they brought it north with them.
Okay.
Right? And I think this is important because what has often happened is once we get into the public, some kind of way, everyday black folks, some kind of way black institutions, all of a sudden now almost have to beg for this presence, right? Although it informed it.
Yeah.
Right, which is one of the reasons. I'm a churchgoer. I don't believe in 99% of the stuff in there, but I believe in the institution. You know what I'm saying? And I really believe in the
beautiful
music.
distinction.
It's the music I really believe in,
Yeah.
right? But it's because
You need to be there.
that music formed the syntax out of which I write when it's my turn to create, right? There's no Aretha, there's no Sam Cooke, there's no Whitney Houston. This goes on and on and on. There's no Malcolm, there's no Martin, there's without these black institutions. And so I'm really interested in trying to figure out, like metaphorically, how do we make the dressing the national meal, right?
On the lower frequencies, it
Right.
already is.
Yeah. That's right, because that's what most people want, right? But they just want us to cook it, serve it, and then wash the dishes. I'm saying, I'm very much interested in the ways in which blackness serves this entire nation, right? And the way it has absolutely undergirded our creativity. I think Zorna Hurston was great about this kind of recognition.
Yeah. You want to say something? My intention was to break the rules and open it up for conversation, but we've talked for 4 minutes. I'm sorry.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry. I don't know why we got 4 minutes left.
Yeah,
Y'all
we
want to
have 4
open it up
minutes.
for some questions? If not, because I wanted to give them a chance to speak to our spirits. And what do I mean by that? All of us are trying to figure out how to stand upright in this moment, because the wind is category 5, y'all. It's coming. It's coming strong, and the water is in tow,
Oh, yes.
right? What does it mean? What do we have to do as public-facing intellectuals? And that description doesn't quite capture what we take ourselves to be doing. What do we have to say to folk who are just trying to keep their footing in the midst of this insanity? Professor?
You know, I keep thinking of this thing that I heard Maya Angelou say, which is, we didn't come here to stay. And so that means that given our finite time on this earth, we have to think seriously about what it is that we're here for. And that also means that we have to relinquish, particularly now, some belief that we can achieve some degree of security and insulation from the storms. And I don't mean that to suggest we should become unsophisticated. I don't think we shouldn't be hysterical, as terrible as things are. I think we should be deliberate. But we also have to have a baseline of commitments that will define the life that we live, whatever that, however long or short that is, and understand that that means that we will likely find moments of encounter where we make choices that put us in the crosshairs. But I also think that that means our concept, we have to become, the word isn't just humble, but we have to also understand Publix in all of its complexity, because it might be that their Publix wind up being the 10 people, and this, I mean this very seriously, the 10 people we're talking to in the yard somewhere, or in exile somewhere. I mean, I think that's the level of the stakes that we're operating with. And so our Publix as they exist now may not at all be the same in a year or 2 years' time, but if we're actually committed to being in relation with the world beyond, we're in relationship with the ideas, we're in relationship inside, but we want to actually nurture this relationship with other human beings, because we want to share and we want this to, we want to participate in the continuation of the tradition. I think we have to be cognizant that all of the things that we've relied upon may be gone.
Indeed. Professor Black.
Okay.
Yes.
Wow, okay. I say two things. One, you have to be connected to something invisible that has as much power as anything you can see. I think in this day and time, if all you know, if all you believe in, if all you trust is what your eye can behold, you are in trouble. Right? I believe that fervently. And I think one of the ways to do that, my grandmother used to say, don't ever find yourself without a song. Right? Don't ever find, hey, God. Yeah. Don't ever find yourself without a song. Which means wherever you are on the planet, if you got a song, you can call it up. You can sing it, and it grounds you. It centers you. It gets you back, to center, right? Far greater than any other thing could. And you can't read a novel fast enough. You know what I mean? To get grounded real quick in 300 pages. You need something that's going to hit it really quick. And music has a way of centering and has a way of reminding us of who we are, right? I would come home sometimes from school, and I would hear my grandmother singing in the house, and I was way down the road, right? And she would just be wailing in the house, right? And sometimes I remember just the echo of her voice. And she would tell me, don't ever find yourself without a song. And now that I've become adult, I understand that. I absolutely get that.
Can we say thank you to these giants?